2030.
2030.
Saudi Arabia, the Point Investment Fund,
It's a
there's a
big
lot of excitement
this
around
transformational
NEOM specifically.
change. Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural,
The
religious.
2030.
2030.
2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla, 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 yalla.
Hello, Hanaa, episode 11 of the 2030. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for asking. How are you?
I am doing well as well. Thank you for asking.
Very exciting. We have a guest today, an interview on the MainStage with Ramzi Abukhadra, who is the chairman of the board of UBS Saudi Arabia. He's speaking in a personal capacity today, a little bit about the history of banks in the kingdom, a little bit more color to some of the discussions that we've had about banks and the financial sector. And he's also going to talk a little bit about the real estate sector as well. And he's incredibly knowledgeable about all things Saudi economy. And I think we're just going to have an incredible conversation. Very, very, very excited about hosting a guest and having a wonderful discussion.
Very exciting indeed. We're actually fortunate that he is going to be speaking in a personal capacity because it sort of gives him some leeway to kind of talk about big picture stuff. And as about half of our audience is in the United States, another 10% roughly in Europe, and the rest in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of curiosity about the banking and financial sector from the outside looking in, as well as real estate. These are two topics that are very popular and not very well known, and very easy to draw one's own conclusion about, which we have given ourselves license to in 10 previous episodes. And now to set the record straight, we're going to speak with Ramzi, who just really understands it all together. And then just to kind of echo what you were saying, his knowledge about the real estate is not just what's happening right now in Saudi Arabia, but also sort of with a historical perspective. We will talk about that a little bit as well. We'll ask him about that. So super exciting. And then in our episode 12 coming up in about 4 days, we have another terrific guest as well. We will be hitting our stride with guests now. People are here to listen to the cool voices and change makers that we can bring onto this program. Manal Al-Dwayan, the famous Saudi contemporary artist. She's a famous artist who happens to be Saudi, who is currently representing Saudi Arabia at the Venice Biennale. So we will be airing that episode on Wednesday with Ramzi today. Super exciting.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we're moving into the next phase of the podcast. I think a lot of people, really interested in hearing diverse voices from inside the kingdom, and everybody has a different lived experience as well as a different area of expertise and professional opinion about what's happening. And I think it's important to really talk about these things from different perspectives.
Let's get to the deep dive.
Before I even start the deep dive, I just want to say that I may have talked a little bit about my perspective on food delivery apps and how I wish that people cooked more. And I think that it's important to maybe preface what I'm about to talk about with a message about the reason why I think that way. So I actually am like everybody, including you, Lucien. I love a food delivery app and I love food delivery, and quick food is great. But I think that we lose connection with our food and what we eat and what we put into our bodies by doing that. And that's influenced by my involvement in the Saudi Culinary Academy called Zadok. And that's what I'm going to have my deep dive on today. So I've been involved with Zadok and the founder, Rania Al-Mualla, who is the chairman and a philanthropist, an incredible human, since the beginning. And Rania's a visionary, and she had a vision for this culinary academy. I mean, first of all, she can make amazing food. And this whole academy was kind of envisioned and drawn up after she traveled to Brazil during the Olympics to help use food that wasn't being consumed, that was being prepared in these massive amounts for catering for people that were there, and recook it, re-prepare it in innovative ways. So she worked with a chef that was in Brazil in his kitchen doing that and packaging the meals and distributing that food to people who couldn't afford to eat or couldn't afford to buy meals. So it was a really incredible initiative. She was there with her daughter Lina, who is also a friend and former student of mine. So Zadok, the Culinary Academy, on May 21st hosted their annual graduation ceremony under the patronage of the Deputy Governor of the Eastern Province, Prince Saud bin Bandar Al Saud. The first cohort of students graduated in 2022, and there were 18 students. And in this graduation ceremony, they celebrated the fourth and fifth cohorts. 27 students finished the diploma program, which is a 2-year program, and 240 students graduated with the associate diploma, which is a shorter program. They all signed employment contracts and are headed into the labor market ahead of the graduation ceremony. The 10th cohort is now enrolled, and 150 students are now enrolled in the academy as we speak. And in August, 56 new students are coming, and they are on a scholarship from the Giga Project NEOM. And one of the reasons that this is very exciting is because about 50% of the academy students are coming into the academy from the Eastern Province, but now the number of students are being sponsored by some of these big projects, which means that they're getting the training in this boutique, homegrown Saudi Culinary Academy and learning the skills and curriculum that has really been tailored to the local kind of market, with the idea and the image that the local market will include people from all over the world coming to Saudi Arabia as tourists and as business people to experience Saudi culture. And, Rania is the first person to tell you that the best way to experience culture is through food and through sharing meals together. So everybody at Zadok is actively exploring Saudi cuisine, merging medleys of kind of traditional Saudi flavors. They'll bring in their family recipes and mix them. So there's a lot of space for innovation within the kitchen, but they're also being trained on global world-class skills in the culinary world. So they have a partnership with the Swiss Culinary Academy. And that's kind of, again, how the Foundation Academy was laid. It was done with international standards. The chefs learn European cuisine, European pastry, and all of that. But then the most exciting part actually is a Saudi-centric curriculum. So Zadok is actually a word that's derived from the Arabic word for generosity in food. And it combines this concept really with the mission, which is to drive social change by providing quality education and training, empowering individuals to create positive change within their communities, to support nationalization efforts and Saudization efforts. So they're committed to really preparing Saudi students and Saudi nationals to be successful in their careers and in the culinary industry, and to provide more employment opportunities. So now as culture and tourism are expanding, this is a great place for young Saudis to learn. But it has a bigger mission than that as well. It really is thinking about incorporating Saudi heritage into the dishes through the projects and competitions that these students are participating in, through the incorporation of their own local cuisines from the different regions within Saudi Arabia into the preparation of the meals. And there's also a sustainability dimension. So there's a whole curriculum dedicated to thinking about the pros and cons of consuming local produce, consuming seasonal produce, and what that means and how we can do that better within Saudi Arabia. And combating this idea of massive portions and huge displays of generosity that can be wasteful. So, the founder, again, I mentioned Rania, she's breaking records as she does it literally. So they participated in 2021 in a Guinness World Book competition. They created the largest cupcake mosaic ever created in the world, which was 150 square meters. It recreated the design of the Saudi flag. The cupcakes were made with dates, and they were then distributed to people from different charities. So it was a really great display. The chefs made the cupcakes. They came up with the recipe. They used local products, and then they were able to contribute them, and they broke a record along the way. Also recently, the U.S. Consul General James Sindel visited with a American chef named Jerome Grant. So he was visiting Saudi. Apparently he has a barbecue joint, but basically it was his first visit to the kingdom, and he does a lot of training. He came, met the chefs, and was inspired by how knowledgeable they were about Saudi cuisine and how inspired they were by the traditions of their own families and how they were able to incorporate that into their practice. So I'm on the International Advisory Board, which is great. I sit there with some incredible people from around the world, including chefs from inside the kingdom as well as abroad. So actually my brother is a big foodie, and there was a tweet about the International Advisory Board when I joined as the vice chairman a couple of years ago. I think it's been maybe a little over a year, maybe two. And there was a chef named Elena Arzak from the Basque region. And my brother called me. He's never really expressed any interest in my position with Zadok and my involvement with them. And he said, "What are you doing on the board with Elena? Can you get me reservations?" And so she's a world-renowned chef. Again, the Basque region is incredible, and it's one of the regions that inspires our practice and our ambitions for where Zadok is going to go. There's also a Saudi chef, Badr Fayez, that's a member of the International Advisory Board. Abdulaziz Al Uthman, who is the chairman of the Kempinski Al Uthman Hotel and a member of Al Uthman Holdings, amongst some other incredible people on the board. It's just been a great privilege to be able to be part of this, to witness the training that happens, the world-class training, and the evolution of training on Saudi cuisine. So my last trip there, every trip that I go visit Saudi, and I have to stop by the academy and have a meeting about different things related to the curriculum, the training, different things that we're planning, events, and so on. And it's a great place. And congratulations to the 27 students that finished their 2-year diplomas. It's not easy. Culinary school is tough. So yeah, very exciting.
I like how you said that you go and you visit Zadok when you're there, and you said that you had meetings and you have business purpose there, but I think you're really probably going to eat. Would that be a fair statement, or are you going actually for work?
Rania is the most generous host, so you cannot go through the doors of the academy without being fed.
Okay, I knew it.
That is, she will feed you. She makes amazing food. I have her cookbook here, which she had, I think, even before the academy was open, called A Spoonful of Home, and it does feel like home. And she kind of simplifies a lot of Saudi cuisine. It's very easy to make the dishes. You can make kebsa very easily. She gives you variations on different things. So yeah, she's great, but. Yeah, there's, the chefs prepare some incredible food as well. And it's all very Michelin star-like food, it's small portions,
presentation,
beautiful presentation. And also they're trained on the hospitality dimension. So I went for a board meeting, and then I got to stay for lunch afterwards. And just the way they are trained to really, really deliver incredible service. I was so moved by the experience of having lunch there.
Awesome story. Really cool to learn about Zadok and the work that you're doing on their advisory board, and the work of the mission in general. It was really interesting to hear about this because I've obviously seen this on your bio. Hanaa, we're doing a show together. I've been curious about it, but we haven't really talked too much about it. And we were getting ready to talk about it off air, and we were like, why don't we just wait? And so it's been really cool to hear about it, and it's a really amazing mission. And I think just if I could add just a couple things. One is, I had food delivery tonight. I've had food delivery a lot here. I've been here for 3 weeks without my family. So it's kind of been, if I'm not out at a work dinner or at the best restaurant in all of Riyadh, in my opinion, called Blue Garden, where I eat 5 times a week, I usually get food delivery. And, You're right in that it's like you're getting this food delivered to you and it's really convenient and wonderful, but you're losing your association with the food itself and with the preparation and the kind of love that goes into it. The second thing that I want to mention is that one thing that was very important to me growing up and in my family was that no matter how busy we were, we always sat down and had dinner together. And meals are and were, for us and for everybody, pretty much a way to connect with other people, a way to connect with the food we're eating and where the food is from, but then really get to know other people and get to know other cultures and, reconnect with your family. You don't have to be with new people to discover things about people you know and love. And so food has that amazing ability to be a vehicle for that in our lives. And so as much as I love having sushi delivered to my hotel door in 18 minutes, that is delicious. Usually when I'm eating food delivery from food delivery app, it's alone in a room. And it's, that's not really how food is meant to be eaten and enjoyed. I think we're both probably fans of Anthony Bourdain, and he was one of the first to really bring this concept to television and show cultures through food and dining and meeting people, randomly at restaurants and bars and elsewhere around the world. So anyway, all that was a distraction from Zadok. It's a really cool organization and a cool mission. And is there a way for you to share how people can get involved or how they can help, what they can do to support? Is there anything like that you can share with our listeners and viewers?
Absolutely. So actually, one thing that Zadok has been doing more and more frequently are these pop-up restaurants at the Kempinski in El Khobar. So one way is to experience the level of service and the incredible quality of food that's prepared, that's infusing a lot of different Saudi flavors and local ingredients into the plates. So that's one way you can experience it. But also, if you visit the Eastern Province, just drop them a line, send them an email. Their doors are open. You can go in and watch the chefs in training, in action, and you can also go in and get a tour. It's a very, very welcoming place, as it should be. Any place that prepares food for other people is a place where you know that the people who are there and running it have big open hearts and really welcome everybody. They want to share their culture and community and their mission with everybody. And there are other ways to get involved. There are scholarships that can be given to students that can't afford to go, which, I've met students. I actually ran into a mother when I was visiting El Ula that told me her daughter was about to go to the Eastern Province to relocate to do training at Zadok. So there are, incredible stories like that of people traveling across the kingdom to go either do the quick diploma or to do a full 2-year training program. One of the students that graduated was just quoted on El Yom. They did a little broadcast, which is the newspaper in the Eastern Province. And she was like, I am confident that people are going to come to Saudi and experience Michelin star level food, and we will get Michelin stars by us, the Zadok graduates, before you know it. So they're very, very confident and incredible students. So we can put some more links to Zadok in the notes.
Inshallah, that comes to pass. Riyadh has really transformed as a food capital as well. And it's really cool that a lot of restaurants in Riyadh that have Saudi cuisine are now doing Saudi fusion cuisine, and they're showcasing cuisine specifically from different parts of Saudi Arabia, the EP, as I like to call it, and the North and the South. And so what is happening here is sort of like a food renaissance. I'm speaking specifically about Riyadh, but I feel like it's happening across Saudi Arabia because, coming here for so long before, it was like you would get Saudi cuisine at certain restaurants, but it was kebsa. There were different ways of doing it. There wasn't a ton of innovation going on, at least not for, B2C for customers. And now it's like, going to Bujeri Terrace in Riyadh, there's so many Saudi food restaurants. There's also a lot of them on Hunger Station as well, which is not how it was originally intended to be enjoyed. And Saudis love to eat together, as people who have visited here know very well. But yeah, I was hungry when you started talking about all of this wonderful work being done at Zadok. And then you went and had to go and talk about the largest cupcake display in the world. And now I want a cupcake, and I'm I have to have one. So I don't know that, it's gonna be a problem here soon.
It's cupcakes made from dates too, which I know you're a big fan of.
A huge
He's so good
fan.
with some Saudi coffee.
Oh, the best, the very best. And I hope to have more debates about dates with you in the future. I had at Blue Garden last night. I cannot say enough about that place. It's like my home away from home, away from home. But they have just the most amazing desserts there, which are irresistible, and now I want one. So thank you for sharing that. A really great deep dive, Hanaa.
This is the main stage.
The main stage.
The main
The main
stage.
stage. This is the main
Could we
stage.
get Lucien and Hanaa to the main stage, please?
Welcoming on the 2030, Ramzi Abukhadra, Chairman of the Board of Directors at UBS Bank Saudi Arabia and Managing Partner of Mayasim Al Khalij Real Estate Development. Mayasim is an investment consultancy and real estate investment and development company in Riyadh, covering a wide range of investment opportunities in different asset classes. Ramzi has extensive experience in the commercial sector in Saudi, holding board seats at Al Haker Group and Abdullah Turki Al Hayyan Sons, and he has experience working with several financial institutions, including MetLife, AIG, AMB, and JP Morgan Chase. Welcome.
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ramzi. We're very excited for this discussion. We're going to kind of split it into two pieces here. One is generally on the financial services industry in Saudi Arabia, and then we do want to talk about real estate. I think a good place to start is if you can give our listeners and viewers a sense of the development of the financial services sector in Saudi Arabia in general. Where is it now, and where is it going?
Sure. I think if you look at the whole banking sector from a evolution point of view in Saudi Arabia, clearly like any bank in the world, it starts with the most basic requirements, that being of, custodying funds, deposits, something that the Saudi banks started a long time ago, whether it's the local banks or the banks that came in with foreign investors. You probably know that ABN AMRO a long time ago created the joint venture in Saudi Arabia, and they named it at the time Saudi Hollandi for the Netherlands, so to speak. And for the longest time, Saudi banks effectively took in deposits from individuals and from corporations as well, and provided loans, whether it's also to individuals or corporations, hanging on to what probably was a very nice risk-reward type of positioning in terms of who they lent to on the risk spectrum. So for the most part, many of the large corporations in Saudi Arabia, certainly the government was a big recipient of a lot of the borrowing from the local banks. And of course, on the consumer side, also there was, and there continues to be, and if anything, it has increased dramatically in recent times. And I'll bring that to the table because it has to do a lot with the real estate sector in Saudi Arabia and the personal mortgages on housing, which has created a big boom in bank lending related to that particular sector, predominantly from the local banks. So as time went, it was basically a very traditional depositor-lender type of relationship. Of course, they continue to have their treasuries to manage, cash that is not necessarily being lent out, or cash that cannot be lent out, because as you probably know, local regulations require that the bank continues to have part of its equity as non-lendable assets. I think as time went, and some banks and maybe some independent entities started working on investment banking, specifically asset management. So they created a lot of funds, be those managing local equities, and managing real estate funds. Each of the banks, also to comply by local regulations, created what is called their capitals, so to speak. So Saudi National Bank Capital, Forensic Capital, Arab National Bank Capital, and those are fully owned subsidiaries, but they operate as asset managers for the most part. And they, in addition to the bank itself being licensed by the central bank, which used to be called SAMA at one point, and then it was changed to the central bank, a new regulatory authority came to the table, which was the Central Markets Authority, the CMA, the equivalent of the SEC in the United States, or the FSA, I guess, in the United Kingdom, that regulates asset managers and investment banking. Investment banking being the part of the business that also caters to companies needing either to be acquired, the mergers and acquisitions side of the equation, as well to those companies that want to IPO. So today, I would say the banks continue to operate in their traditional sectors, which I just explained, and they created the capitals to move into something a little bit more spicy, more interesting, rather than just deposits and lending. The Saudi banks, for the most part, till today, have not crossed border for the most part. And if by crossing border, I mean you don't see a large presence, for example, for Saudi National Bank, which is the largest bank, along with Rajhi Bank in Saudi Arabia, outside of Saudi Arabia. So they're very happy in their own territories. And for the most part, their balance sheets, whether their assets, are utilized quite a bit. I alluded just a little bit ago to the mortgage sector, which, with the introduction of 2030 and the need by the government to increase housing ownership by Saudis, the government created these systems with the banks, whereby the banks would lend with a lot more ease and with more assurances. There were some backstops, some guarantees that were provided by the government, or specifically the Ministry of Housing, in order to encourage banks to lend. So that, if anything, allowed the banks to utilize a lot more of their balance sheets. And finally, since we spoke about 2030, or we brought it to the table, the needs by the government for more liquidity is clearly quite obvious, and I think it's the talk of the day right now in Saudi Arabia. Has put more requirements from the banks to lend the government, and that continues to happen. So that's where the banks operate today, vis-a-vis their evolution from very traditional to a little bit more, sophisticated players, relatively speaking.
So to bring some of those kind of things on the table together, Vision 2030, where banks are today, local Saudi banks not yet going cross-border. There was a recent Bloomberg article, a report that said Riyadh is gradually emerging as a financial hub, and this is really as a result of a government-led Vision 2030 push, taking a sort of carrot and stick approach by making it easier for foreign firms to operate locally, but also using the Riyadh HQ program for leverage. I'm wondering how this drive to sort of make Riyadh more like Hong Kong or Dubai as far as a banking destination affects local banks and how they are playing together in this environment.
The international banks initially existed under JVs, and then more recently on a relative basis. Okay. And this happened when Citibank, and I forgot the year exactly, decided to break out of what at the time was Samba, the Saudi American bank. Citibank at a point in time felt that, for their own reasons, that Saudi risk was outside of their appetite. I mean, the country always, in terms of world affairs, ebbed and flowed in a way. And so Citibank decided to sell its stake in Samba and exit the country, which created a bit of a sour taste with the central bank, SAMA, at the time in Saudi Arabia. As you can imagine, having foreign banks in the country does create a sense of confidence in the place, and openness, and also competitiveness. So the central bank at the time allowed several banks to apply, and they did give licenses for fully owned foreign banks. Those specifically were JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, PNB Paribas, and I forgot the fourth, but they were, so they came in under SAMA license with an ability to do many things. At the time, I was with JP Morgan when JP Morgan entered Saudi Arabia, keeping in mind that JP Morgan was sort of the bank of Saudi Arabia as far as foreign banks go for the longest time. So JP Morgan was part of the initiation of SAMA, back when it was put together, which is a central bank. And then it continued to have excellent and continues to have very good relations, whether it's with the Saudi government or Aramco. The other banks that came to the table, whether it's Deutsche Bank or BNP Paribas, and also several GCC banks, came into Saudi Arabia as well, all under the central bank umbrella. Now, if you ask me, have they gone outside their own comfort zone? And if you say their comfort zone is definitely working with the government, that is an absolute yes. Selectively with some corporations, yes. Beyond that, the foreign banks have, in my opinion, have not done a lot. Okay, there are reasons for that. When you look at any bank, banks take into account country exposure. How much of their balance sheet they can expose to any one particular country. They look at the risk and risk-adjusted returns. Saudi banks do not consider Saudi risk to be zero, because by definition, if you are sort of working within the government, and they don't consider the Saudi Arabian government to be at zero risk. So you are at the end of the day part of the sovereign. So they look at risk in a different way, and accordingly they lend in a different way. They have a lot of local knowledge with the corporations in Saudi Arabia. They have a lot of local knowledge in terms of the consumer in Saudi Arabia. So a lot of the local banks, when they lend, for the most part, they use somebody's salary as a quasi-collateral. The salary is assigned to that bank. And then when it comes down to repaying, whether it's credit cards or any kind of lending, the bank has recourse to that kind of a capability to protect itself. The international banks never went as far as very much understanding local risk, let's call it, okay, whether it's on the individual side and how to protect themselves, or corporations. Interestingly, small and medium enterprises in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in terms of the local banks or international banks, have not been big beneficiaries of the banking system. The banks continue to treat SMEs as high risk, and accordingly, they give the money after a lot of scrutiny. What's been happening lately also, and we haven't spoken about this, is the emergence of fintech. Okay, so these are newly formed companies that are regulated, whether they are regulated, for the most part, they're regulated by the central bank as well. And they have an ability to lend money. Their source of capital, because they're not fully licensed banks, cannot be the same source of capital as deposits which come into banks. So they have their own equity, and they can raise debt as well. But you're hearing more and more about them, the likes of Tamara, for example, the likes of the entities that are doing a buy now, pay later type of thing. And they are working with individuals in the country, and they can work with also SMEs in the country. And they have their own ways of securing the risk. They can use receivables as collateral. They can ask any corporation to assign the receivables to the bank before they can, or to the entity, the newly formed entity, as they lend out. In terms of individuals, they've also managed, interestingly, to create systems which allow them to understand and profile people in a manner that allows them to understand the risk of that particular individual, and accordingly how they would pay that individual. Their default rates till today all seem to be within reasonable numbers. So at least on paper, they all seem to be okay-ish. Of course, their biggest hindrance is their cost of capital, because the cheapest cost of capital is deposits, and they are not able to take deposits. So it's a very dynamic system that's happening right now. But to your question, the international banks, at least in my opinion, have not gone in. PNB Paribas, you ask them what they're doing. I mean, I cannot speak on their behalf, they're content sort of doing what they were doing prior to them entering Saudi Arabia, but having established an office in Saudi Arabia. Okay. JP Morgan, probably the same thing. Now you would ask, okay, what's the plus of being in Saudi Arabia? I think these banks have been all beneficiaries of the country, whether it's in terms of the relationship with the government and lending the government, or having cross-border M&As with the government. And the government understandably wanted these banks to come in and establish a Saudi presence in order to create some kind of a transfer of knowledge to the local Saudi population in terms of the Saudi bankers. So they employed a lot of Saudi bankers. And there has been this spillover effect in terms, if you think about it, when Aramco, which is the biggest kind of example of how a foreign company can enter a country, and by virtue of operating and employing Saudis and training Saudis, a lot of know-how gets embedded within the Saudi system and within Saudi individuals. I would say on that level, probably the international banks have done a very good job. Yes. In a case example, a gentleman who was with JP Morgan at one point and then went to Saudi Forense, became CEO there, and now he is the deputy chief executive officer of NEOM, Rayyan Faiz. He's an example, an example of somebody who benefited from the training of having been with JP Morgan at one point. Myself, I'm Saudi national. I spent 7 years with JP Morgan, and I learned a lot from JP Morgan, created a lot of good relations with clients and got to understand their needs. And then I spun off on my own, and I created my own small boutique company that does, advisory work and real estate development. So I would give credit on that side a lot.
So let's talk about financial literacy in Saudi Arabia. We think it's an area that the kingdom could really improve in significantly. Do you agree with that? And do you have any recommendations of what could be done?
Yeah, Hanaa, this is not a question relating to the banking sector alone. I think the country, by definition, when you were looking at what we're trying to do in 2030, is trying to elevate itself to a place that people want to come and live in and create and be innovative in. And it's a story in the happening. The aspirations are there. There is a lot of work that is moving in to achieve that goal in that direction. But I think what many like me realize is that it will take time. The likes of Singapore, even the likes of Dubai, our neighbor, a lot of the financial centers were not created overnight. And I don't think it's easy to create them overnight. Many pillars have to be in place to attract the right people and for the system to become the kind of system that allows a city to become a true global financial city, London being one of those. And I mentioned others. So maybe the biggest challenge that we have is reconciling the time that we need to do the above with our aspiration to have the above in place yesterday. Okay. And to attract the right people, you need a very livable city. You need an airport that is extremely good from a logistical point of view and covers many global destinations. You need schools that cater to the children of those high-level people, whether Saudis or expatriates, irrespective, that allow them to come in and put their kids in school. You need an environment whereby what they are used to in terms of services and amenities in any big city can be duplicated within, whether it's Riyadh or, let's talk about Riyadh. Riyadh is the main hub, right? I mean, NEOM is still ink on paper with a few, excavation work that's happening right now. So it's far from being realized. So Riyadh, I think, has moved a lot forward. And as you know, Hanaa, and so to speak, women, ladies in Saudi Arabia have been beneficiaries. It was about time of the Vision 2030, opening up the society, equal employment opportunities, their ability to become a lot more independent. So that contributed also to the workforce in a big way, which was great. And for the most part, and I will admit this, I think the average lady in Saudi Arabia is probably today more educated than the average man, because they probably spent a lot of time studying at a time when they could not join the workforce. So now they have this advantage to them. So to your question as to our aspirations, yes, these are grand aspirations. But for Riyadh to become a truly global hub, I think it will need time, and we need to have more innovation there. We have some natural challenges. It's very hot in the summer. We have natural challenges such that the city is extremely spread out, which creates a lot of traffic, case example, because we're not a true urban environment in the sense of the word. The number of cars per capita in London or in Singapore, for that matter, relative to the number of cars per capita in Riyadh is an order of magnitude different, which puts a lot of pressure on the local infrastructure. So the city is gradually moving in that direction. It will take time. We are also in a race against time, because one of the main pillars of 2030 is diversifying the economy. And as oil becomes either a dwindling resource or its value vis-a-vis, the global economy becomes, with alternative energy sources, with economies and other sectors growing vis-a-vis knowledge-based economies. So oil as a commodity could become a smaller portion of any kind of a GDP. So we are in a race against time. I think we can do a lot, and the most that we can do, and the way we talk with each other, my generation, is we need to be part of the system and we need to try. Okay, anybody can be skeptical, but then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're all skeptical. So we're all trying, but it is challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of thinking about the livable city and attracting people, I'd like to talk a little bit about your real estate business and, being managing partner at Mayassim Al Khalij. Real estate development in Saudi Arabia is focusing on Riyadh. Tell us about that, your business, and your opinion of real estate development.
So Riyadh, historically, from a real estate point of view, grew organically, and in no way you could say in an organized way. Okay. So the concept of proper urban planning, the concept of livability, to be honest, you cannot blame anybody because of the past. We came from a place, Riyadh came from a place where the real estate infrastructure was extremely basic. And you know that, Riyadh was nothing, a small city in the middle of the desert. And then this source of wealth started coming to us. And people's main objective was to have houses, right? And then with the houses, we need some shops. And we need some roads. And so it was more about fulfilling those basic needs than thinking, let's slowly, European cities grew over hundreds of years. And it wasn't a matter of suddenly being endowed with a lot of money, and so everything could be built overnight. And then whether it was being built correctly or not was something that was on the table. Riyadh did not benefit from that. Riyadh grew very quickly and grew in a manner that was not the initial urban planner who worked on Riyadh, I think in the 60s, was a gentleman by the name of Doxiadis. Okay. He was an urban planner. He came to Riyadh. I think he was part of whatever legacy Riyadh Development Authority was at the time. And Riyadh well, Hanaa, it's a grid-like system, it's like these squares. And these squares are duplicated all over the place, right? And initially, the municipality of Riyadh, in order to allow you to build, all what it had as a prerequisite is a very thin layer of a street equivalent that allowed people to get to that dwelling that they were building or that store that they were building. Within the code, there was nothing related to other infrastructure, lights, sidewalks, water, electricity. And so you needed that thin layer of a road, what resembles a road. And once you have that thin layer, you can actually sell that individual piece of land. And then you buy the land, somebody buys the land, builds the house, and goes to the municipality and says, where's my water? Where's my electricity? Where's my etc.? And the municipality gets enough pressure, and maybe 4 or 5 houses aggregate, they go and they provide those amenities, right? And lo and behold, another cluster gets built elsewhere, and they go and provide for that cluster. And before you know it, we forgot to put, that there was no reason for sewage, because you will not build a full sewage network if you don't have clustering density, that is, because it's expensive, right? And so once there is density, they started adding more amenities. So long and behold, the roads go back and get redug up, and you know what the road situation is like in Riyadh. So, and that happened for the longest time. There were no regulations, and there continue to be no regulations related to the facade of the buildings. There were no regulations related to the parking spots required when you build. So whether you build a high density structure or a low density structure, the roads provided the parking. Well, that created a lot of, smaller roads and no sidewalks, because rather than having sidewalk, you would have cars parked next to the house. So this was all, and I cannot blame anyone, Hannah. I mean, it was not the primary objective. The primary objective was, let's build the house, let's live, and let's get the water and electricity. Okay. So you move forward, you jump forward. People like us came to the system, Mayasim, and we were lucky in the sense that we were able to work with a family that had a very large land bank. And we went to an urban planner in Germany, the same urban planner who created the diplomatic quarters in Riyadh, which I'm sure you've been to, which are planned in a very idealistic manner. And because it's a government plot of land, very large government plot of land, that was created to house all the embassies in Riyadh at the time, and the services related to the embassies, the government, relatively speaking, did a spectacular job. So they created everything all at the same time to, rather than piecemeal in the way that I've just described. So they put in the whole infrastructure, they created the right roads, the right sidewalks, and the government built everything. Okay, so it wasn't going to happen gradually by individuals. The government took on that master plan, and voila, you have the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh. So we aspired to create that on the private sector. We aspired. Okay. We went to the same urban planner who put together the diplomatic quarters, a company called Albert Speer and Partners out of Frankfurt. And we tried to marry the vision of Albert Speer with the regulations of the municipality in Riyadh. And it was close to impossible, because the municipality in Riyadh did not have the level of sophistication and aspiration as we had as a private sector, because we are a private sector, and this somehow relates to some of the other things we might speak about today, is effectively commercially driven. Okay, the government might look at things not from a purely commercial point of view, but they look at spillover effects. They look at GDP growth. They look at employment. They look at other elements that allows the government to spend money in a manner that is not necessarily purely commercially driven, but has these spillover effects that benefit the economy and the people at large. Anyway, so our aspirations gradually and surely started to dwindle. Okay, we wanted to create an urban structure whereby commercial centers were very clearly within the reach of a residential communities, and they were accessible by footpath. Okay, and we were nixed out. We were told we cannot do that, and the main reason why the municipality fought this kind of a vision is, believe it or not, cars. Okay, because we have so many cars. The biggest fear there is that as somebody wants to go to a commercial center and there isn't enough parking because of the density of cars, they will end up putting their cars all over the residential area. And so the residents would then start complaining about that residential neighborhood turning into a parking lot or blocking. So there's this amazing segregation in Saudi Arabia between the residential areas and the commercial areas. Now, gradually what's happened is the regulator decided correctly to increase number of cars per rentable area, the increased number of cars per an apartment block that is being built in order to address something like that. So that's happening right now in order to de-bottleneck or to open the way towards a better urban structure. Okay. We are starting to become beneficiaries of that, but it's still not completely there. The problem with cars, frankly, is that, believe it or not, having a parking spot is expensive, meaning you have to build underground, you have to build basements. And if that's expensive, then at the end of the day, the leasable store, the built-up apartment, so to speak, you load that extra cost onto the structure that you are building. So either your lease becomes more expensive or the apartment becomes more expensive. We have an issue with cars. From an urban point of view, I tell you, it's not something that is very apparent to everyone, but every major large urban city in the world has some kind of an infrastructure, whether in terms of public transportation, making having a car prohibitively more expensive. I mean, can you imagine having 3 cars in London near your house, Hannah? What would happen to your or in New York for that matter, or in Singapore for that matter, or in Paris for that matter? So we have. I don't know how to deal with it in Saudi Arabia. The metro is coming to the system. Hopefully, it will take some pressure off of the roads and off of the requirements for parking. And other solutions have to come into place where the car becomes a little bit more expensive to own and become more of a luxury as opposed to everybody can own a car. But we are way off in terms of that. Now, there are definitely, okay, so that's the private sector. From a Mayasim point of view, just to continue, we ended up going more traditional, okay, for the most part. We have created some, unique developments that are in the form of commercial plazas that are of a more interesting architecture, walkable, inside, outside, inside. Like, you've been to them, to some of them that are like them. And, the walk in Riyadh, the Riyadh front, which is now Roshan front. So we're seeing more of these developments happening. There are 2 major private sector developments. One of them is happening, which is the Avenues Mall by Ashaya, and the other one is Mall of Saudi Arabia, which hopefully will come back. There are reasons why it's been delayed. These are very large, super regional malls, there along the lines of Dubai Mall of the Emirates, very, very large leasable area. And I think those will create very interesting destinations in Riyadh. Now, the biggest elephant in the room, as we say, is the government. So the government in parallel is moving along with creating the likes of Dar'iyya, the likes of Gaddiya, the likes of Al-Murabba, the Square, and other developments where, again, the government creates these things not with the only objective of commercial viability, but with the idea to enhance the whole urban environment, right? To make Riyadh a more livable city, to again, I'll say employment, GDP, and money velocity. As Riyadh opened, as Saudi Arabia opened, one of the biggest beneficiaries in the country in terms of what's happened is the money velocity of the Riyal. So the Riyal was staying in the country more as opposed to exiting and being spent outside. And that helped in GDP growth significantly. And allowed the government then to impose things like VAT, because at the end of the day, VAT, no matter which way you cut it, is coming out of the private sector, right? So, but as the economy grew, the government also benefited from that levy, so to speak. Now, you ask about the banks coming into Saudi Arabia and lending, and the international banks, okay, or international institutions coming in. These institutions will come in and they will say, listen, we are not here to do economic development. We are commercial banks, right? And for the most part, the Saudi banks also are commercial banks. So we need to see the commercial viability of any project before we can lend to that project on a non-recourse basis. And by non-recourse, what we mean is that if the project, for whatever reason, fails, the only recourse that those banks have is the project itself. They don't have recourse to the entity that borrowed, the entity being the government, so to speak, or Mr. X, so to speak. So lending to those projects, and yes, the international banks are being invited to come into the country to participate in the 2030. Lending to these projects that have a commercial viability in and by themselves as a standalone, which is not very clear, becomes more difficult. And so the international banks and even some of the regional banks find it more difficult to lend to these projects as standalone projects on a non-recourse basis. And again, I explained what I mean by recourse and non-recourse. So in my opinion, what's the solution to some of that? I personally think we swung too much towards giving the government the main function of developing the country economically and hopefully commercially, etc. There's a lot of talk, Hanaa, as you know, about the private sector feeling left out, okay, or being overwhelmed by government projects. And so the private sector is not participating as much. In my opinion, one of the solutions is to marry the two efforts together for various reasons. To marry them, of course, the project has to be commercially viable. But the government, at the end of the day, can create ways vis-a-vis cooperation with the private sector to either, by definition, they're subsidizing the project in and by itself to achieve the economic growth, right? And the urban structure, right? So they are, by definition, subsidizing their commercial, the pure commercial viability of the project. They are subsidizing it. But cooperating with the private sector allows the private sector to bring in more money to these projects because there's a lot of private sector money, and also creates many more efficiencies. And the term efficiency is the key. Efficiency and productivity. The private sector, once you put in your own money as a private investor, you no longer have an issue which I will call principal agent issue. The principal agent is when you are someone who's investing on behalf of someone else and it's not really your money, okay? And let's be honest, government employees are employees, right? The consultants that we are bringing in, Hanaa, the McKinseys, the BCGs, every single consultant and his cousin is in the country, has no skin in the game, zero skin in the game, okay? And if they were to have skin in the game or to get their fees by participation, by the success of that particular project that they are recommending, they would have second and third thoughts. The private sector, if it's brought in the correct manner, again, to look at the feasibilities, to ask the hard questions, what is needed to make it at least partially commercially viable, brings in that efficiency because the private sector is putting in its own money. So it's, and that principal agent disconnect no longer exists. Okay, so I think that's where things should be going forward. It's not as easy because the problem with that is that it will slow things. The private sector will not subscribe by definition into every single project that is being created, and the private sector will need more checks and balances and more of a convincing to make sure this project is actually viable than someone saying, you know what, here's the green light, press it, and before you know it, everything is being built. So we need to balance these objectives, right? Time, efficiency, all of these things have to come together. But otherwise, my and what we're seeing today is that we will put too much constraint on all of the resources in the country. And by the way, by taking time, we would allow the system to breathe. There's a lot of inflation that's coming into the system today because we are straining resources. We are straining human resources, salaries, material resources, raw material that needs to come in, contractors, etc. And so that creates a lot of pressure on pricing. So you're building something for that much more, and then you need to make money out of it. But if you are building it for that much more, well, guess what? You're competing with Dubai. You're competing with Singapore. You're competing with other places that are able to be possibly, I'm not saying they are necessarily, more efficient. And thus, how will you be able to compete with them if you're building for a higher cost base? How are you able to compete with them if you have to overpay in terms of salaries and bringing people to the table to achieve effectively the same objective? So that ability to be competitive is very important to create this global hub that you alluded to, that you spoke about, right? We need to have people who can produce for the same price, whether it's goods or services, as anyone else in the world, for the same output in terms of quality and what have you. Now, this is me thinking as an economist, as a banker, and from a real estate point of view, I mentioned what's happening, and I sort of mingled everything almost all together. I didn't mean to do that, but at the end of the day, these, whether it's finance or real estate, they play a role together, and maybe that's what I spoke about just now.
I feel like the government may, and from conversations that I'm having, I feel like the government may be now becoming more and more aware of what you just described. And I'm wondering if you have any insight onto how they'll sort of how they will attract private sector investment, especially into things like the giga projects where it's, let's be honest, very needed. They need the private sector to be participating in that. Is it a more competitive tender process? Is it a very clear outlay of incentives for the private sector to participate? Where do you think they can kind of come together to make that happen, and it makes both sides happy, both the investors happy and the government happy that they're getting private sector participation in these projects?
So I think a couple of things need to happen. We need to focus more on those projects that are more viable, and we need to stretch the time. We cannot do everything all at the same time, which is what's been happening. And we need to line up the incentives of all of these consultants with the ultimate goal that takes into consideration the ultimate success. That's not easy because consultants want to be paid upfront. What has allowed us, Mayasem, to relatively speaking succeed is we've opted to put a lot of our economic benefit as an advisor to our clients at the rear part of any project that we now. It's not like we don't get paid along the way, but what we get paid, what allows us to eat bread, okay? And then you leave the main course would happen when there is some realization of success. And so a different kind of mindset needs to come to the table. I think also we have many very good local people who understand that this also needs to happen. Their willingness to participate is somehow being hindered by these objectives that do not seem to reconcile in their heads. Okay. And so the objectives have to become more achievable. Can we stretch time? We don't. I don't think we have much of a choice. Time is probably the only commodity that nobody in the world can buy, right? So focus, stretch, bring in people whose benefit ultimately lies in complete conviction that the end game is going to work, and incentivize them accordingly. And you know what? Give them more than what would they take if they were getting their money just sort of a piecemeal. Give them a carrot at the end of the road that is so big that they will become a lot more creative with you. And effectively, that's capitalism, by the way.
So I think we have taken a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. I think that, your expertise and your view of the economy, the banking sector, the financial sector as a whole, as well as the real estate sector, and just the development that's happening within the kingdom under the vision, and your insights and opinions are invaluable. So I really want to thank you on behalf of myself and Lucien for coming on the 2030 today and really telling us a little bit about how you see the kingdom going forward. So Ramzi Abukhadra, thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Hanaa, one thing. I'll tell you, since you mentioned in your closing remarks 2030, we have no luxury to fail. Okay? We have no luxury to fail. So all of us who are thinking along the lines of what I mentioned today, it's because at least in our own personal thinking and capacity, are trying to make sure we are hedged so that we do not fail. So that's maybe my closing remark in terms of why we're encouraged, but we're also cautious.
I love it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ramzi.
Thank you. Have a great day. Great being with you.
Hanaa, let's get to the news. Saudi Aramco signed an agreement with Pascal, a global leader in neutral atom quantum computing, to install the first quantum computer in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The agreement will see Pascal install, maintain, and operate a 200-qubit quantum computer, which is scheduled for deployment in the second half of 2025. Hanaa, what is a 200-qubit quantum computer in 2 sentences or less?
Well, I can tell you what Georges Olivier Raymond, the Pascal CEO and co-founder, said about it. He said, quote, "The era of quantum computing is here. No longer confined to theory, it's transitioning to real-world applications, empowering organizations to solve previously intractable problems at scale. Since launching Pascal in 2019, we have directed our efforts towards concrete quantum computing algorithms immediately applicable to customer use cases. Through this agreement, we'll be at the forefront of accelerating commercial adoption of this transformative technology in Saudi Arabia. This isn't just any quantum computer. It will be the most powerful tool deployed for industrial usages, unlocking a new era of innovation for businesses and society."
Wow. It's kind of a big deal. The quantum computer will initially use an approach called analog mode.
That doesn't sound very sophisticated.
No, it doesn't. But I have a feeling it's quite sophisticated. I think that's probably just a simple name. And then within the following year, the system will be upgraded to a more advanced hybrid analog digital mode, which is more powerful and able to solve even more complex problems. I still don't know what this thing is. Pascal and Aramco intend to leverage the quantum computer to identify new use cases and have an ambitious vision to establish a powerhouse for quantum research within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Do you remember the show Quantum Leap?
Mm-hmm. Of course I do, yeah.
So that used to come on Saudi Channel 3, which was the Aramco channel. That's why I used to watch it. I used to watch Quantum Leap because Aramco used to air it as one of their, evening shows. And that's where I used to watch a lot of kind of American shows, sitcoms and things like that when I was growing up during the year. So I love that Quantum Leap was there. And I learned a little bit about time travel through that show because of Aramco. And I know this is not the same thing.
It's so funny. The connection is just the word quantum. But since we're talking about that, and since we don't know anything more about this quantum computer, Pascal, I know that Aramco invested in Pascal through one of its VC arms, and that the CEO of Pascal won one of the Nobel Prizes or something like that. I mean, they're an incredible company and one of the big venture investing success stories of Aramco. I know that. but about this story, I know nothing. So I want to respond because I want to ask you more about Aramco TV. I bet their TV selection was fire. I bet they were just like, give us the MacGyvers, the Quantum Leaps, like give us the cool, like fire TV shows. Yeah.
So you know who we need to have on the show to talk about this is my colleague Maylim Zani, whose father, I want to say, was the first person in charge of Aramco TV. So she has some really interesting stories to tell about that. But basically, Full House, The Wonder Years, there was another show that had, Doogie Howser, definitely. And Quantum Leap, MacGyver for sure. MacGyver was like my favorite show.
MacGyver's the best.
That and a lot of cartoons.
Yeah. So you mentioned it, but we would love to have May on, and the work that y'all do together at Nusif is really incredible, an amazing mission. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to dedicate part of that interview to the television situation at Aramco, because I wonder what it's like now as well. I mean, now it's probably just like everybody has like the cable situation, but back in the day, I'm sure there was like one fire channel, like, 3 or whatever, channel 4. And it was just like, this is all the good stuff.
It was channel 3. And actually, it was unique to the Eastern Province because you had Saudia channel 1, which was Arabic, and channel 2, which was English. And then you had channel 3 that was only in the Eastern Province, and it was Aramco. And it would only start at 4 p.m. And so you'd wait, like if, usually on a weekday, you'd come home from school, do your homework, and just as you were finishing up, you turn the TV on and it would start basically, like the channel would start broadcasting, and it would end, 9:30, 10 p.m., something like that, a little bit later in the weekends. And sometimes they would show, I think, movies on the weekends. I'm pretty sure they did. And there was definitely cartoons for kids at 4 p.m. when it started. And then it would go into like sitcoms. Ooh, you know what else? Unsolved Mysteries.
Oh my
that was
gosh.
Something that always came on that show.
Yes, it's so good. I love that show. It was so scary when I was a kid. I don't know why I watched it.
It was really scary. I still actually remember it. Like, you know how like you have flashbacks? There's a couple episodes I still have flashbacks of. I can even tell you about them. We're not going to talk about it today.
No,
though.
but they still have that as a podcast. There's a couple of podcasts that do sort of unsolved mysteries, and there's another one called Something Radio with Dwight from The Office. But like actually we'll drive home. Sometimes I listen to it. This is so stupid, but sometimes I listen to it on my way home from Dulles Airport in DC to where I live in a town called St. Michael's, and it's a long enough drive, and it's always at night that I'm making the drive, and then I'm exhausted. Then I listen to these scary stories to keep me awake, and then I'm like, I'm getting old, and I'm still afraid from listening to a story like a campfire kind of story. We are here now because we started talking about Pascal and Aramco, and here we are.
And
can I ask
really
you,
sophisticated things.
I know. Can I ask you though, like, did this channel, which is just totally taken over our news segment, but did this channel have any original programming, or is it just like they're just syndicating the fire stuff from the US?
So, Aramco is really big on health and safety. Really, really big. It's a huge part of what they do. So there were like these small health and safety productions, kind of commercials even, that would air. And every now and then you'd know the people that were acting in them. So I had a friend actually in my class, and her whole family were doing this thing on like safe crossing across the street. And I just remember just being like, oh my God, I know her. That's Sarah. So anyway.
I know that about Aramco because I recently did this interview, as I mentioned in a previous episode, at the Future Aviation Forum with that really amazing pilot from Aramco, Khaled El Nator. And I was asking about, I was like, look, this is a really cliche question, but like, what keeps you up at night is a question that people want to hear about because you're a pilot. And he's like, well, complacency keeps me up at night, and that's built into me from Aramco. It's like, first of all, I'm stealing that answer. Anytime anybody asks me that, the answer is complacency. It's a great answer. But he was just talking about how like health and safety is part of his DNA now as part of Aramco. And then he's dealing with 50 aircraft, 13 airports, et cetera. So anyway, that is how you take a news segment and you go just completely off. And that's okay. It's our
off
podcast.
Rails.
We can do whatever we want. And we will get back on track now with the Saudi Standards Meteorology and Quality Organization requested the Saudi Ports Authority, Mawaneh, to ban the entry of imports from 20 automakers in the kingdom.
So the move was taken after automakers failed to submit the 2024 supply plan within the specified time. Mowanet said in a circular. They said the list of these automakers will be made available on the Energy Efficiency Unified Electronic Platform.
It shows that they're not just going to let a bunch of jalopies in here. They're kind of taking it very seriously, and they also want to make sure that they're tracking the efficiency and standardization. So it shows a more sophisticated Saudi market, and they don't
Kind
want
of screening.
Exactly, yeah. But there isn't any specific information on these car makers yet. But they're also sending a message out there being like, you can't just mail this in, guys. You have to comply with what we set. And we want our customers to know that there's a quality control climate of, responsibility, and we will enforce that. And, you probably weren't expecting us to do this, but we take it seriously, and you need to now as well. So kind of cool.
Yeah. Saudi Pro League players are headed to Euro 2024 tournament. 15 players from 7 Saudi Pro League are taking part in the 2024 UEFA European Football Championship, commonly referred to as the Euros or UEFA Euro 2024. These SPL players, most of whom moved to the kingdom last summer, are valued at an estimated total of $267 million. The collective market of all players participating in Euro 2024 stands at an impressive $12 billion.
Whoa.
It's a lot.
That's a lot of coin. The Euros kick off on June 14th across multiple cities in Germany. This year, 4 players from Al Nassr, including nobody knows about this guy, Cristiano Ronaldo, who played very well the other night in the match against Al Ittihad, which was not like a week ago, but had a couple good opportunities, and he blew them for goals to put them ahead. So anyway, cool. The Saudi Pro League is really coming along, making huge strides in recent years, and you could even say recent months. So.
I mean, a lot of players, 15 from different Saudi clubs are going. I want to shout out to Al Ittifaq, who have 2 players going, Dutch Jorginho, and then also Scottish Jack Hendry. I can say that is going to be there. Plus, again, like we said, 15 from different clubs across the kingdom are going to be there. Big event for soccer fans across Europe. There's loads of signs in the UK, talking about kind of Euro 2024 shown here in different establishments that you drive by. So
yeah, my
son is kind of looking forward to it now that the Premier League is over.
And Man City took it 4th time in a row.
They did.
It's gotta hurt for you guys. It's okay. There's always next year.
We were really close.
Yeah, it's really close.
We're really, really close. Yeah. It was actually the closest it's ever been for Arsenal in a while, and they played so well. But it's a young team. They're getting to know each other better and better. They got so much closer this year than they did last year. They're second again. One more go. Inshallah.
And there's, good news, of
Poor
course.
Faris.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, you guys were the first place of all the losers in the league. And so, next year, if there's a little more effort, maybe you'll see a better result. Moving on, the date sector in Saudi Arabia sees a 13.7% export growth in the first quarter of 2024. So Saudis slinging dates. The National Center for Palms and Dates announced that the value of Saudi Arabia's export of dates during the first quarter of 2024 rose to 644 million Saudi riyals, which off the top of my head is about $180 million, and an increase of 13.7% compared to the same period in 2023 when the value of its exports reached 566 million riyals.
Yeah, in an interview with Arab News in March, Mohammed Nouran, the CEO of the National Center for Palms and Dates, emphasized that Saudi Arabia's export portfolio extends beyond dates, encompassing derivatives like molasses, pastes, and other products. The diversification enhances the sector's export presence beyond the kingdom's borders. East Asian countries are receiving attention from Saudi exports of dates, especially to Singapore, apparently, but also Indonesia, Malaysia, China, and other countries as well.
The total value of date and date byproduct exports has surged 152.5% since 2016. That's a lot. That's definitely a reflection of investment into this sector. I personally love self-exporting dates back to the United States every time I get on that Saudia flight at the airport, usually, because I'm way too impractical with time management to purchase dates anywhere else but the airport. But when I do, and I get to make my selection of favorite dates that I prefer to take back that I think are better than any other, can you guess which ones I might be saying?
I think you're going to go with Sukkari from Al Qasim.
How'd you know? Sukari are the
We've
best
had this conversation before.
dates ever. I love them. They're so sweet and delicious. They keep well. And the Qasimis, man, they just make a good date.
All dates keep well.
Of course, but they don't dry out as quickly.
Qasawis make better dates.
No, the Qasimis have got it figured out, and great businessmen and women, terrific financial
where
minds,
the
and dates people,
largest palm oasis in the world is in Al-Hassa, and there's lots of different types of dates, including Sukkari, but the Khlas dates, native to Al-Hassa especially, are amazing. And again, I think I've mentioned this in the past. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show, but there's a rivalry in my household between Sukkari and Khlas because my husband's Qasimi and I am from Al-Hassa, and therefore there's a preference. But you know what? Even Aziz, my husband, thinks that certain types of Sukkari, depending, can be a little too sweet. But we should move on. This is a debate for another time when we can actually be testing and sampling.
Yes, we need to do that. But just one more thing. The way that you and Aziz work it out is you put the exact same amount of Halas and Sukkari dates right next to each other on like a buffet table for whatever holiday. And then you see which ones got taken more. No cheating, by the way. You guys can't just like pick off the ones that you want to be like, oh, people want this more than the other one. So this little piece of advice is how you settle that. Okay. Anyway, moving
That's how we're going to settle
on.
it.
Yes. From quantum leaps to soccer to dates now to space, the Saudi Space Commission celebrates the 1-year anniversary of astronauts Rayana Bernawi and Ali Al-Qarni's trip to space and stressed their efforts in preparing Saudi astronauts to go into and conduct innovative research in this space, which is space.
In the space. They also stated that they're working on building stronger partnerships with leading educational research institutions, both locally and internationally. The 2 astronauts going into space was a very important moment for Saudi Arabia. Having a woman and a man both go up to space together. It was just a really, it was a fantastic moment. It really gave a lot of young Saudis this kind of thing to aspire to, where if you can make it to space, then, obviously your horizons really do expand beyond the borders of the world that we're in. And so it's an exciting thing, and I'm happy to celebrate them.
That was a really cool moment for Saudi Arabia, just to echo what you were saying. And it was cool as an outsider looking in because it kind of symbolized a lot of progress and investment that Saudi had made to be in the space. At the aviation forum last week, I met this gentleman from the Space Commission, and just a really bright dude. And it was kind of cool talking with him and just kind of, talking about what's next in that space. Asked him to provide us with somebody to come on our show and talk about it. We can also tie this back into TV. Favorite TV show growing up for me was Star Trek, especially The Next Generation, but then also Voyager and then Deep Space Nine, because space is the final frontier. So, Hannah, a good, fun news segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.